So I'm sure, like me, you got an email from Redwell saying that they were looking for a new presenter to join their team, and I thought, nuts to it, let's go for it. But instead of just doing it solo, I thought I would upload my application and talk you through how I approached it, as there's a bit more to it than you would expect. So Redwell, for one of those that don't know, is a continued professional development team. I've used this now for the past 5-6 years since I was a registrar, and I found it really helpful just in terms of the way they present and the style of articles mainly that they give out. And I thought with the opportunity to join their organisation with the stuff that I do on my YouTube channel would be brilliant. So let's give it a go. The actual application process itself is in 4 parts, and this is where I'm up to. First part is a covering letter, which is just like, why do you want to join the organisation? Second part, a CV. I've got a standard format, 2-page CV. If you want to have a look, just drop me a link below and I'll happily pull you to what I do. Conflict of interest form, which is fairly self-explanatory, and then the big chunky one, which is why I wanted to make this video, is about making a 5-minute PowerPoint presentation. This is probably what may put people off, and I thought I'd show you mine. They really want you to start to create a connection with the audience, to pick out some key learning points, and just to make some clear and interesting PowerPoint slides from it. Obviously the document is 8 pages, and that's a lot of information that you could potentially pull out from. So it's clear, I went through this time and time again, and there are some certain key points that I pulled out, and you'll see that in the PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if I've got it right or wrong, but actually, so a couple of big learning points for me. That scoring system to see whether they've actually got gout, I found was fascinating. Looking at, instead of offering if they've got multiple attacks of gout with allopurinol, but actually everyone should have allopurinol. And then finally having a look at that nurses are much better than doctors at dealing with this, which makes sense. The actual PowerPoint presentation, I made it quite obvious that it was going to be a 5-minute update. After I've done this, I will actually show you my full presentation, try to connect, for some funny pictures, just to sort of break down some barriers. And initially I thought mentally I'll break it down into 3 parts. For me, the actual sole part was the follow-up and the confirming diagnosis. That was the real bit that I learned from. So, the initial tack I just sort of gone over a bit, because actually that's quite useful to know. And then deliberately kept that colour coding so people knew where they were in it. This gout scoring tool, as I said previously, was the big thing that I learned, hence why I sort of put it in its own slide. And finally, the management, sort of making sure that allopurinol for all, and that was the big taking home from point, and also with titrating doses, highlighting again, as previously discussed, about nurses being better than doctors, and also, touching on some interesting points from the article itself. And finally, just some useful information. The bit that I love about Redwell is their auditing and the audit ideas that they always highlight. So that's why I wanted to really highlight from the article some audits that they suggested that could easily be taken with this article into general practice. And as one of those that once the COVID pandemic has died down a bit, please, that's something actually would be quite useful to sort of bring in. So that's it. I hope you found that useful. Once I've sort of wrapped up, if you want to stick on and actually watch my full presentation, please feel free. I hope to see you at the interview itself, and please feel free, just come across if you found this useful, drop me a message, please subscribe to the channel. If you want an update, if I'm lucky enough to get selected for your interview, then just drop me a comment and I'll see what I can do. Right, I'll stop there and go to the video. Hello and welcome to this 5-minute update on gout. This is based on the British Society of Rheumatology 2017 guidelines, which has then gone into a Redwell update. Before we go any further though, what I want you to do is picture your gout patient. Hopefully they don't look anything as hideous as these 2 cartoons, but I really want you to paint that mental image of your mind, because actually gout is incredibly common and one of the most common inflammatory arthritis that you're going to treat in primary care. And what these guidelines recommend is quite significant to a lot of the practice, and certainly my own practice has changed from reading this. We're going to break down this update into 3 parts: how we treat the acute attack, what we do on the initial follow-up in about 4 to 6 weeks, and then how we go about confirming the diagnosis and onward management. So the initial attack, as you can see here with a good going podagra, normally would go for something like first line of colchicine, 500 micrograms 2 to 4 times a day, but as an alternative using any non-steroidal with a necessary PPI. Second line dose, and this was a new one to me, was actually using prednisolone, 35 milligrams once a day for 5 days. And if you're trained to do so and it's safe, you can use intra-articular steroid joint injections. Interestingly, that it's still the gold standard to get a joint aspirate, but as you can well imagine, there's a whole number of false negatives due to poor technique. And never forget the non-pharmacological methods, especially as we're a lot over the phone, and you may have started some of the medication, of simple rest, elevation, ice, and using a bed cage to protect the actual joint itself. Follow-up wise, bloods should be delayed to that 4 to 6 week period because there may be an abnormally low urate in the initial acute attack as all the crystals are drawn into that joint. So this is a new one, and I'm still mulling over in my mind how I'm going to push this out to the practice, is the Gout Scoring tool. It's got a phenomenal positive predictive value of 87%, and basically you can see it up here that you use several different methods to so their sex, whether they've had previous attacks before, whether it's happened relatively acutely, just to give them a score. And anything over 4, you're looking at the diagnosis, whereas if it's over 8 points, then it's highly likely and that you should start treatment. Now, interestingly enough, this sort of goes against some of the initial bit of whether or when to do this score. Do you do it in the acute setting where you may have an abnormally low uric acid, or do you wait 4 to 6 weeks? My argument would be is that you wait and delay to actually confirm the diagnosis of gout, because then that goes on to the other suggestions of it. And the main suggestion here is that allopurinol is given to or offered to all patients who are suffering with gout. Now, normally I would just have a fairly frank discussion with them of whether they feel that their gout is, that bad that they want to start treatment. But actually, no, this is not the case. They should do, everyone should be first line, and basically it should be, with a cross cover of colchicine, certainly for the next 3 to 6 months, as it will push them up for likely attacks. Likewise, with some second line treatments as well. And you can titrate this over 4 weeks just to make sure that the urate's in the range. And the other bit as well that they hammer home is the treat to target. Okay, making sure if they got any tophi, and if those tophi have subsequently resolved, it depends on given your level. Okay, what's interesting though is that nurses are far better at doctors, according to a Lancet study, at actually doing this. And likewise, the thinking back to your patient, what do they look like? It's probably unsurprising to you that they are often your ones with metabolic disease, diabetes, dyslipidemia, and have a high cardiovascular risk factors. And what's interestingly is that the lower the urate does not seem to have an impact on the likelihood of a myocardial infarction, but again, the evidence is not really that good out there. And of course, if they're hypertensive, avoid thiazide diuretics because it will inflame them. So, to summarise, we've got some really good audit ideas. The use of the diagnostic tool, which I'm going to take to my own practice. Is the urate lowering therapy being offered to all? Can you get your nurses involved more? And are you doing annual screening? Thank you.